Alright, the hull and the turret are all completed. So I'm going to move on to the rocket launcher assembly. And I've already cut a couple of the rocket tube parts off, and there's going to be a little bit of cleanup going on because there's some flash around the edges of the tubes there. So I'm going to have to clean that up. So I'm going to glue all these parts together, all the tubes, and get them all lined up, glued, and then start cleaning them up and give my thoughts on those parts so far. So this will begin part 5 of the M group build of the Sherman M4A3 with T-34 Calliope. Okay, as you can see, I've got the first set of rocket tubes completed, and they went together okay. There's just some kind of weird stuff going on with it, and I'll explain that in a sec. The basic way I put this together was this top section, this lower section here, they're two different two-part pieces. So what I do is, whenever I'll show this as an example, because I did this the same way, my primary consideration was to make sure that the tubes were round and not shifted. So I held it in place, and using to me extra thin, I went across, held it in place, made sure it was nice and secure. Then I moved on to the back, made sure that was lined up as closely as possible. Didn't worry as much if I could make sure they were lined up this way, I did, but didn't worry about it quite so much because I'm able to sand that off and able to sand this back off, and I'll talk about that in a minute. So anyway, that's how I put those together, these together, and it fit okay. And as I showed in my earlier video, the tubes have a little bit of flash on the ends, so I had to take care of that first. And what I did is I just laid out some sandpaper and just laid these flat. Tried to keep this perpendicular with the surface of the table. Just basically rubbed it back and forth, rubbed that off. Then once they were nice and flat and smooth, then I used this FlexiFile sanding device here, which is kind of nice. I use it like floss. Stick it in between the tubes, and I can go around like that and get any flash off the edges, and did both sides of each tube. Then I just used the side of my knife and scraped the faint seam. It's not a very bad seam. Scraped that smooth, you know, made sure I kept it light, so maintained the round shape. And basically that completed, you know, that completes the row of tubes. Then this part here, this whole row, these are all separate items. Or I mean, this whole strip here of little short piece of tube is separate from this. And because of the way they're molded, they end up like this. And it's kind of wonky. But instead of being perfectly cylindrical in shape with the wire attachment there, they're shaped more conical. So this diameter is smaller than this diameter. Now obviously not this extreme, this is just for illustration purposes, but you might be able to see that they're just a little bit smaller, and it's kind of a weird deal. I mean, I don't know how else they would have molded it, but so what I had to do is, and then also the edge is not perfectly flat and angular, it's kind of rounded. I'm sure it's from the, you know, it's designed that way so it'll make it easier to punch out of the mold. So I had to sand it to get it nice and flat, and I basically did the same thing as I did on the tubes, just laid on some sandpaper and sand it until that rounded edge is gone and it sits as flush as possible. with the back of this. So here's what it looks like. You got this piece and this piece here. And as you can see, they don't really fit really flat and flush. So I'm going to sand this down, and if this is flat enough, I can get away with just flattening this seam out here, and it should fit pretty flush. On one of these, it was like this. The upper half, or the upper, the upper half of this row of tubes didn't line up perfectly with this one, so I had a little bit of a lip on the back where this piece meets up there. So what I did is I just cut the locating pins off, because it's pretty easy to line it up without them, and did the same thing. Sand, got it nice and smooth, and was able to get it, for the most part, quite a bit better as far as being flush. Now, there is a wee little bit slight joint you can see here, but I'm going to be using some really thin plastic, evergreen plastic, styrene card, really thin stuff, and I'm going to cut it in strips and wrap that around here, because in the photos references I have, there is a flat piece wrapped around this, so that will cover up that joint, and I'll see what it looks like. So anyway, that's the rocket tubes, and they've turned out okay, better than I thought they would. And so I'll finish these up, finish cleaning these up, finish gluing these other parts, and then I will start working on the actual brackets and mounting hardware that mount these to the tank turret itself. So we'll come back in a little bit and check that out. Okay, here's a quick, do a real quick segment here on how I actually clean these up. I've got the sides of the tubes all done, and then I hook them together with the locating pins so they're where they should be, and then I just take hold it flat and just sand it to where the fronts are smooth. Then I take my flexi file, get inside each one like this, I'm only doing this to show you how quickly it can be done and get a decent result. This way it takes care of the little bit of flash in the seam line where the tubes go together. I'm trying to do this at an angle that I'm not used to so you can see it. It's not really comfortable holding like this, but I want you to be able to see what I'm doing. Just do like that, and that gets the in-between part. And then to get just a little bit of edge that's been created from sanding it, I just use my smooth, I think this is a 280 grit, and just lightly zing it across there like that, and it gets that little bit of residual plastic from the sanding process off of there. Okay, so it's all nice and smooth on the outside. You can look, see if there's any other parts, and if there's not, you're good to go. Then I use my Dremel tool, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a Dremel tool, just something that will do kind of the same thing. And I've got this kind of a tip on it. And what I do is I put it on the second to lowest speed. I just want to go on, well, I've got it on lowest speed. I just want to go on really slow, and then carefully, see if you can see it, buzz it out like that, and that'll get rid of any burrs inside. And if you're careful, you can get it to a good a little bit better scale thickness. You just want to be careful that you don't go too far. So once I get all that done, that one's good to go. And then what I'll do is I'll cut these off, put them together again, do the same thing, sand it smooth, then sand these smooth to where they fit flush. That's basically it. So again, I'll finish these up and get back with you when I start building the mounting hardware. Okay, as I mentioned, I was going to detail up the rocket tubes with another strap that goes straight across. And what I did is, thank goodness, I've had some Evergreen sheet, Evergreen brand styrene. Let's see, it's an assortment, one each of 0.010, 0.15, blah blah blah. And I've had these. I bought this whole package for $2.79 back in around 87, 88, something like that. And I've had it ever since. I don't use it a whole lot, but I cracked it out to do the straps to go around the rocket tube. So what I did is I got the sheet here, and I didn't measure it or anything. I just eyeballed it. I have a pretty good eye for this kind of stuff. Use my straight edge. Let's see. I'm gonna do it over here where you can see it. I got my straight edge at the width I wanted, and using the back of a good X-Acto blade, I just scored it till it came apart. Now after I was done with that, it had a little bit of fuzz on the edge, so I just laid the strip on edge. Say this is the strip, and using my fine sanding stick, I sanded and sanded and sanded, felt for rough spots, sanded any burrs on the edges, got all that off both sides. Made two of them like that and glued them on like that. Now as you can see, they're longer, that way I've got this top part cemented, and once it dries, cures really well, I will bend it around the end here and across the bottom and cement that, and I will be good to go. And what I will do is, in order to because this part right here will be exposed after I attach this cross member here, since it'll be exposed, I'll put a short piece in between there, and then this will cover the seam here and here, these rocket tubes. So that's what I've got. So that'll give me a nice flush flat strip, bend it around the edges, glue it, and it'll look splendid. So anyway, just wanted to show you real quick how I did that. Continue on.